Now,
good afternoon.
If you were a fireman, would you be going around offending people with the name, do you think? Would you change it to fire them or fire person?
Maybe that's the way forward. Fire thing. I don't know where we're up to with this at this point. I mean, this individual, Dave Russell, I'm sure he was, serving on the front line at one point. I've got enormous respect for firefighters, but I can imagine most of the people who work under him think this is absolutely ridiculous. This is the sort of thing that we used to talk about coming out of a student union, and yet it seems like it's spilled into all layers of society. I get that since the 1980s, officially, the fire service have referred to firefighters because there are women firefighters, about 8% of the total at this point. But what he was doing in this story, it's fascinating, was sending an email around to his staff and basically castigating them for using the phrase casually. He said that we employ firefighters, not firemen, and haven't for decades, so why use the term as a quote? And he said that it needs to stop and that the term, this is a quote, permanently erased from our vocabulary. So it's just such a ridiculous overreaction, but it just shows that more and more institutions seem to have people like this in them.
Yeah, can I also just raise the point about the Greater Manchester Fire Brigade as well, that they were absolutely slammed in a inquest into the Manchester Arena bombing because it took them rather a long time to actually get anyone in because they were too, quotes, risk-averse. So the argument could be, Tom, that maybe they should focus more on doing their job as opposed to whether or not the term fireman is offensive.
Well, this is something that we see across the board. You're talking there, of course, about the horrendous failings that have been laid at the feet of Greater Manchester Police. I mean, we see things like this, initiatives like this cropping up in the police, rather than the fire service, all the time. For instance, many of our kind of different kind of police officers across the country have come under sustained criticism for their mishandling of cases, horrendous cases that we've all heard about that we don't want to discuss again on a Friday afternoon. And yet at the same time, they're spending all of time, money, doing their squad cars up in rainbow colours. This is something that we see time and time again. I think it does speak to what priorities. The other thing I think it speaks to, particularly with this case, is this willingness and this celebration of employers effectively policing the speech of their employees. And that's where this does get a bit more serious. This is something that we're starting to see time and time again, where you have these codes, which on the surface are quite ridiculous, but if you don't stick to them, you could find yourself in trouble, whether it often in the form of pronouns, less so in the form of this kind of more gender-neutral language. That's not something that I think we should be comfortable with, I don't think.
Yeah, and they say, well, what do you want to grow up to be? And you ask those kids at primary school, OK, and they go, fireman. And in the case of David on the Isle of Wight, who's been in touch, he says that he was at a school recently, and he says that a teacher piped up. He does road safety classes at schools, and he said that he said, what do you want to be? The kid said fireman, and the teacher said, no, it's a gender neutral school, we say firefighter. And then he said he went to another school and they said you can't call them firefighter, it's too aggressive, it's fire personnel. And at what point do we push back on this? Otherwise the greatest football team in the world, Tom, Manchester United, is going to become People-Chester United.
Well, it feels like it's going this way, doesn't it? I mean, it's so utterly ridiculous. And the problem is that there's also a serious edge to it as well, which is that this is just the more easily mockable end of this compulsion that people have to try and rewrite language, to try and cleanse it of anything upsetting. This weird idea that we're so robotic that if we pick up the wrong idea, even implicitly from a term like firefighter or firemen rather than firefighter, we're going to become some sort of terrible bigot. It is ridiculous, but it's kind of the thin end of a culture which wants language to be cleansed and sanitised, and that is something that we should be worried about.